A little boy stood crying on the side of a quiet road when suddenly 5 massive German shepherds surrounded him. People thought the worst, but what those dogs did next stunned everyone. A lost child, a group of canine dogs, and a moment so unexpected that it changed the way people looked at animals forever. Why were these trained German shepherds in the middle of nowhere? Why was the boy crying? And how did this one encounter uncover something much deeper than anyone imagined? Stay with me, because this story will touch your heart in ways you never expected. It all started on a quiet Tuesday afternoon, the kind of day where nothing seems urgent, the kind where people sip tea on porches, neighbors wave lazily at each other, and even the birds sound like they're humming lullabies. The town of Willow Creek, nestled just at the edge of a dense national forest, was known for its peace. Time moved slowly there. Children rode bikes, dogs napped in sunny driveways, and everyone knew everyone else. At least, that's what they thought. But peace has a funny way of disguising what's coming. About 2 miles from the town center, a narrow road cuts through the trees, like a forgotten ribbon. Few cars pass there. No stores, no gas stations, just woods, and one old wooden sign, half-rotted, pointing to Green Hollow campgrounds. Most locals didn't go that way unless they had a reason. But on this particular day, that stretch of road bore witness to something no one would forget. A little boy barefoot, no jacket, tear-streaked cheeks, stood on the side of the road, alone. His name was Lucas, only 6 years old, too young to understand danger, too old to not feel it deep in his chest. His legs were scratched, mud caked under his fingernails. His small hands were trembling, not from the cold, but from fear. Every so often, he'd glance into the forest behind him as if expecting something to come out of it, something scary, or maybe someone. The silence was heavy, too heavy for a child that age to carry on his own. A few cars slowed when they saw him. The first, a silver SUV, rolled down its window just an inch, then rolled it back up and drove off. The woman inside was alone, and fear is a powerful thing. Another driver, a middle-aged man, stopped, stared for a moment, looked around, then pulled away too. Not because he didn't care, because he didn't know what to do. And that's when the dogs appeared. Not one, not two, five. 5 large, lean German shepherds, their paws hitting the gravel in perfect rhythm, their eyes sharp, bodies tense, and on each of their backs, stamped in bold yellow letters on black vests, was one word, K9. It was like something out of a movie. The boy on the road, the dogs emerging from the woods. They didn't bark, didn't growl, just approached. For a split second, everyone watching from their cars held their breath. These weren't pets. These were working dogs, the kind trained to chase down criminals, sniff out explosives, and hold their ground under gunfire. The kind of dogs you don't walk up to. The kind that can bring down a full-grown man in seconds if commanded. And now, they were surrounding a crying child. One moved to the front, stopping inches from Lucas. Another flanked to his right. 2 more took the left and rear, while the 5th held back, just enough to watch from all sides. Their bodies moved like clockwork, silent, precise, coordinated. There was no hesitation in them. They weren't lost. They weren't confused. They were on a mission. From a distance, a young couple who had parked nearby stood frozen. "Are they attacking him?" the woman whispered. "No," the man said slowly. "I think they're guarding him." The dogs didn't lunge, didn't show teeth. Instead, one sat down directly in front of the boy. Another laid down beside him. One nuzzled the stuffed bear Lucas had dropped, gently pushing it back into his lap. People were still too afraid to approach, but they couldn't look away either. It was as if the dogs had made a decision among themselves. This boy belongs to us now. We protect him. And in that moment, for the first time since he wandered from the woods, Lucas exhaled, a soft, shaky breath. One that said he finally felt safe. But why was he there? Where had he come from? Why were these K9s, who should have been on duty or in training, suddenly out in the middle of nowhere, guarding a stranger's child? None of it made sense. But the story behind how Lucas ended up alone, and how those dogs found him, was far more chilling than anyone could have imagined. Hours earlier, in a quiet clearing of the Green Hollow campgrounds, Lucas had been laughing. It was the kind of carefree laugh only a child can produce. Light, full of trust, echoing between tall pine trees. His shoes had been kicked off near the edge of a creek, his small backpack tossed lazily on a picnic bench. The air smelled like pine sap and charcoal from old fire pits. He wasn't alone, not yet. Across the clearing, his mother, Sarah, stood chatting with another couple near a battered green tent. She kept looking over her shoulder, checking on him every few minutes, making sure he hadn't wandered too far. Lucas was curious, but he wasn't wild. She trusted him to stay close. The camping trip was supposed to be a reset. Just 2 days out in nature to unplug. No phones, no TV, just woods, stars, and a chance for Sarah to reconnect with her son after a hard few months. Divorce was messy, even messier when there was a child involved. Lucas had taken it harder than anyone expected. He stopped talking much in school, withdrew from his friends, even began having nightmares that left him curled up in his mother's bed by morning. So when Sarah's co-worker invited them to join their family on a camping trip, she jumped at the chance. This will be good for him, they said. Fresh air helps, they promised. And for a while it did, until something shifted. It started small, just a strange feeling. Sarah later said the air felt heavier, the woods a little too quiet. The normal rustling of birds and squirrels faded. Even the wind seemed to stop moving the trees. But she shrugged it off. Maybe she was tired. Maybe it was just nerves. Then, sometime around 3:45 p.m., she turned to hand Lucas his water bottle, and he was gone. She called his name once, then twice, walked around the creek. No answer. At first, she thought he was playing a game, hide and seek. Maybe he wanted to surprise her. But minutes passed, then more. Her voice started rising. Other campers noticed. By the time 10 minutes had gone by, she was sprinting between trees, screaming his name. Lucas, Lucas. Still nothing. The other family joined in, searching, yelling, scouring the trails. No one had seen him leave. He hadn't said a word. It was as if he'd just disappeared. Panic doesn't arrive all at once. It builds slowly. First confusion, then worry, then the cold, hard edge of terror. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. Had he fallen into the creek, wandered deeper into the woods, been taken? The last thought almost made her collapse. She called 911, barely able to keep her voice steady. The dispatcher's questions blurred together. She couldn't remember how long it had been. Maybe 20 minutes? Maybe more? Stay where you are, they told her. Help is on the way. But staying still felt impossible. Every minute counted. Lucas was only 6. He didn't know these woods. He could be hurt, scared, or worse. The sun had already begun to dip lower behind the trees. In a few hours, it would be dark, too dark for a child to find his way. Meanwhile, deeper in the forest, Lucas was running, not fast, not like he knew where he was going, just away, away from the noise, away from what he thought he heard. It had started with a voice, a man's voice, not someone he knew, deep, scratchy, like the people his mom told him never to talk to. At first, he thought it was a camper, but then he saw the man. He didn't look like a hiker. He wasn't carrying a backpack or fishing rod. He had on dark clothes and boots that made no sound. He didn't smile, just stared. And when Lucas turned to leave, he heard footsteps behind him. That's when fear took over. He ran without thinking, through the underbrush, across wet rocks. Branches slapped at his face, dirt filled his socks, and tears stung his eyes. But he didn't stop. He didn't dare look back. Eventually, the forest grew quieter. The footsteps behind him faded. But now he was lost. Totally, hopelessly lost. The trees all looked the same. The sky above was just slivers of light between branches. No roads, no tents, no mom, and no idea how to get back. Lucas wandered for what felt like hours, though it was barely 40 minutes. His legs ached. His tiny hands were scraped from falling. Hunger gnawed at his belly. And worst of all, that feeling of being watched hadn't left. That's when he stumbled onto the road. He didn't even realize he'd reached the edge of the forest. One moment it was trees and mud, the next, pavement, gravel underfoot, cars in the distance. But he was too scared to wave them down. What if the man followed him? What if he was still in the trees? So he just stood there, trembling, eyes wide and scared, as cars passed. And then, from behind him, branches snapping, Lucas turned. That sound again, that terrifying, cracking sound. But what emerged from the forest wasn't the man, it was the dogs. They came out of the woods like shadows, 5 of them, large and strong, fur bristling in the fading light. German shepherds. Each one wore a dark vest strapped tightly to its torso, gleaming in spots where the sun caught the thick fabric. Across the chest, bold white letters read, K9 Unit. For a split second, Lucas thought maybe they were police dogs. Maybe help had found him, but they weren't with anyone. There were no officers trailing behind, no flashing lights, no sounds of radios or sirens, just the soft crunch of paws against leaves and the low, steady breath of trained animals that knew how to move without making noise. Lucas froze. The dog stopped too. One stood at the front, slightly ahead of the others, taller, more muscular. His ears twitched, nose raised in the air, as if he were scanning for danger. A scar ran across his muzzle, a deep line that made him look both wise and battle-worn. He took a single step forward. Lucas took a step back. His tiny foot hit the edge of the road, his heel slipping on a bit of loose gravel. He stumbled slightly, wincing as the scraped skin on his knees met fresh pain. The lead dog stopped, and then, without warning, sat down, just like that, calm, steady, as if to say, "I'm not here to hurt you." Another dog came forward slowly, sniffed the air, and laid down beside the first. Then another, and another, until 5 massive dogs had positioned themselves around the boy, not attacking, not barking, but shielding him, guarding him. Lucas didn't understand. He looked around, expecting someone to step out of the woods, to call the dogs back. Maybe they'd been sent by someone, but no one came, just the soft rustle of wind returning to the trees. One of the shepherds, smaller than the rest, with a torn right ear and unusually pale eyes, edged closer to Lucas and gently nudged his hand with his nose. Lucas flinched, but the dog didn't bite. He just sat and watched. The boy, trembling, finally whispered, "Are you here to help me?" The dog's tail gave a single thump against the road. Lucas didn't know why, but he felt his knees buckle, and he collapsed right there onto the pavement, exhausted, overwhelmed, and utterly confused. The dogs moved in closer, forming a protective wall around him, 2 in the front, 1 behind, 2 flanking the sides. A perfect formation. Somewhere across the road, a car slowed to a stop. The driver, a middle-aged man named Richard Tolan, stared wide-eyed through his windshield. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. A little boy, barefoot and filthy, surrounded by what looked like tactical K9 dogs, sitting calmly as if guarding a VIP. Richard rolled down his window. "Hey, you okay?" he called out. Lucas didn't answer. Richard hesitated. Something about the dogs unnerved him. They didn't look wild, but they weren't acting like normal pets either. Their eyes stayed locked on him, measuring, watching. He reached for his phone and dialed 911. "This is going to sound insane," he told the dispatcher, "but there's a child sitting in the middle of the road, and he's surrounded by military dogs or something. I don't know what they are." The dispatcher asked for the location. Richard gave it. "They're not letting anyone near him," he added. "I don't think they're aggressive, but they're definitely trained, like police trained." Within minutes, emergency responders were on their way, but something still didn't sit right. Who were these dogs? Where had they come from? Why were they alone? And why, despite everything, did they seem to know exactly what they were doing? Back at the campground, Sarah was barely holding it together when the ranger vehicle pulled up. Her hand shook so badly, she couldn't open the bottle of water someone had handed her. Every second was a nightmare. Then finally, the radio crackled, a voice on the other end. "We have a child matching the description, approximate age 6, located near Deer Hollow Road. He's unharmed." Sarah collapsed to her knees, sobbing, but the message wasn't over. He's surrounded by 5 unidentified German shepherds. All appear to be outfitted with official K9 vests, requesting backup to secure the scene. The ranger looked up sharply. "What did you say?" he asked into the mic. "Did you say K9s?" "Yes, sir. 5 of them, full tactical gear." A silence fell. "That's impossible," the ranger muttered under his breath. "Why?" "Because that area hadn't had an active K9 unit in over 2 years. The last team assigned to that stretch of forest had been disbanded after a tragic accident. A fire in an old ranger cabin had taken the lives of 2 officers, and the 5 dogs under their command had gone missing shortly after. Despite extensive searches, they were never found. Some assumed they died in the fire. Others said they'd run off and perished in the wild. But now, 5 German shepherds, wearing K9 vests that looked very similar to those lost 2 years ago, had appeared guarding a boy who had wandered off into the same part of the woods. And they were acting like they were still on duty. As paramedics arrived, the dogs didn't flinch. They didn't growl. They simply rose slowly, stepped aside, and allowed the medics to approach Lucas. And as they checked his vitals and helped him to his feet, the dogs began to back away, slipping into the woods without a sound. No one saw where they went. Not a single paw print was left behind. As the sun dipped lower behind the tree line, casting golden fingers across the road, the last glimpse of the German shepherds vanished into the forest. And just like that, they were gone. Lucas was loaded into the back of an ambulance, wrapped in a soft gray blanket, his face pale but calm. A medic tried asking him questions, his name, where he lived, if he was hurt, but Lucas barely spoke. He just kept glancing toward the woods, eyes searching for a glimpse of those silent protectors who had shielded him when no one else was there. Back at the campground, Sarah saw the flashing lights pull up and ran faster than she ever had in her life. When she saw the tiny figure wrapped in a blanket being lifted from the back of the vehicle, she dropped to the ground with a sob that cracked through the air like a thunderclap. "Lucas!" The boy turned at the sound of her voice, and for a split second, the fear in his eyes disappeared. He called out for her, and moments later, they were in each other's arms, Sarah clutching him so tightly it seemed like she might never let go again. People around them cried. Some clapped. The ranger stood quietly off to the side, watching, his brow furrowed in deep thought, because something still wasn't adding up. Lucas had wandered nearly 2 miles from the campground, through thick underbrush, uneven trails, and even a narrow stream that cut across the terrain. For a child that small and barefoot, it should have taken him hours, if he could have made it all. But the boy's feet, though scratched and dirty, weren't deeply cut. His legs weren't torn from brambles. His body, while dirty, didn't show the kind of injuries you'd expect from a solo trek through the wild. And the most puzzling part, he hadn't been spotted until he was already at the road's edge. So the question lingered, how did he get there? Sarah clung to her son, whispering reassurances, but Lucas kept his head turned slightly toward the forest. His lips parted as if he wanted to say something, but didn't, until finally, he whispered, just loud enough for Sarah to hear. "They followed me the whole way." Sarah pulled back slightly, looking into her son's eyes. "Who, baby?" "The dogs," Lucas said. "The big ones." A chill ran through her. "You mean they found you?" Lucas shook his head. "No, they were already there. In the woods." He looked down, as if trying to piece it together. They were waiting. The next morning, reporters began showing up. It didn't take long for the story to spread. Boy found safe after disappearing in National Forest, protected by mysterious German shepherds, wearing K9 vests. Photos from the scene showed the dogs standing around Lucas like soldiers. No names, no tags, no handlers. Just disciplined formation, perfect posture, and unwavering eyes. One photo went viral. Lucas sitting cross-legged on the road, blanket around his shoulders, while the lead shepherd, scarred muzzle, tall frame, stood directly behind him like a bodyguard. The internet dubbed the group the Phantom K9s. Some thought it was a prank. Others believed it was part of a training program gone rogue. A few even called it divine intervention. But law enforcement had different questions. Where had these dogs come from? Who trained them? And how were they still wearing official K9 gear? Gear that was supposed to have been destroyed after that tragic fire 2 years ago. Detective Laura Maddox was assigned to investigate. A former military K9 handler herself, she had a deep respect for dogs like these. But even she admitted she'd never seen animals behave like this without human direction. They didn't act like strays, she told her team. They acted like a unit. She reviewed the old files from the fire. The reports mentioned 5 dogs: Rex, Bruno, Shadow, Ace, and Nova. All highly trained, all deeply bonded to their handlers. They had worked search and rescue in the same forest for nearly 4 years before the fire changed everything. But here's where it got strange. The gear the dogs had been wearing, the same type Lucas's protectors had on, was discontinued after the fire. The department switched to a new manufacturer, and yet, the vests seen on the dogs in the photos from Lucas's rescue were from that old line, and not just similar, identical. Even the stitching patterns matched. Laura requested access to archived GPS logs from the old K9 team's collars. Surprisingly, some data remained. The last signal before the fire had come from the northern edge of the park, right where Lucas had been found. It was as if the dogs had never left. Later that day, when Lucas was feeling better, Laura visited him. She brought a few photos of the old K9 unit, black and white shots from training sessions and group patrols. She laid them on the table in front of him. "Lucas," she said gently, "do any of these look like the dogs who helped you?" Lucas leaned forward, his little finger tracing over the images. One by one, he shook his head, until he stopped on a photo of a tall German shepherd with a scar running down his face. "That's him," he said, tapping the photo. "That's the one who sat behind me." Laura blinked. "Are you sure?" Lucas nodded. He didn't bark. He just watched. She looked down at the photo. It was Rex. According to the official report, Rex had died in the fire. But Lucas was sure. And not just about Rex. He pointed out the others too. Ace, Bruno, Shadow, and Nova. One by one, with childlike confidence. "They were all there," he said. "They made a circle around me, like a shield." Back at the precinct, Laura sat staring at her case board. 5 dogs, 5 presumed dead. Now somehow back and saving lives. But why now? Why this boy? And most importantly, where had they gone? because no one had seen them since. No paw prints, no fur, no sightings, just silence, as if they had emerged from the forest, completed a mission, and vanished like ghosts. But one thing was certain, something was watching over that boy, and whatever it was, it wore a vest that read K9 unit. 2 days after Lucas was rescued, the forest was quiet again, but for some, it would never feel the same. Sarah hadn't slept since bringing her son home. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw flashes of those dogs, powerful, precise, eerily calm, and every time Lucas spoke of them, it sent a chill crawling up her spine. "They didn't just find me, Mom," he told her one night, as he clutched his stuffed bear. "They knew I was coming." Sarah sat at the edge of his bed, running her fingers through his hair. "What do you mean, sweetheart?" Lucas glanced toward the window. "I heard them before I saw them, in the trees, like they were waiting." Sarah didn't know how to respond, because deep down, she had felt it too, that something larger was happening, something that couldn't be explained with just reports and files. Across town, Detective Laura Maddox stood in a small evidence room, reviewing an old incident folder. Burn marks scarred the pages. The file smelled faintly of smoke and time. Inside were the last photographs taken of the original K9 team. There was one image in particular, a candid shot of the 5 dogs with their handlers, just before a night patrol. The men looked proud, the dogs, alert, fierce, loyal. A note scribbled on the back in faded ink read, "Guardians of the forest, unshakable, unbreakable." Laura closed the file and stared at the wall. It was quiet, too quiet, and then her phone buzzed. A report, another sighting. This time, near the Eastern Ridge Trail, a woman hiking with her daughter had taken a photo of a single German shepherd standing on a large rock, motionless, ears high, vest clearly visible. By the time they approached, the dog was gone, but it had looked directly at them. When Laura zoomed in on the photo, her heart skipped. Scar on the face, tag on the vest. It was Rex, still out there, still watching. That night, as wind rustled the trees and coyotes howled in the distance, a soft patter of paws moved through the underbrush. 5 shadows glided silently between the trunks, alert, coordinated, synchronized. No barking, no howling, just 5 protectors, moving with purpose, toward something unseen, but felt, because deep in those woods, something else had stirred, and the dogs knew it. Detective Laura Maddox didn't believe in ghosts or miracles, but what happened with Lucas had shaken her logic. She sat behind her desk, the morning sunlight stretching across the folders spread in front of her. Every one of them was related to the same thing, the K9 unit that had gone missing almost 4 years ago. Rex, Shadow, Blitz, Kuno, Jax, all presumed dead in a forest fire that had consumed part of the eastern sector of the national park. Their handlers had been injured trying to rescue hikers during the blaze. The dogs had reportedly gone back in to help and never came out. There had been no trace since, until now. Laura picked up the photo taken by the hiker. It was blurry, taken on a phone, but unmistakable. Rex, standing proud on that ridge, same scar across his nose, same piercing eyes, same vest. The tag on the vest even had his original badge number. That wasn't just a coincidence. It was either an elaborate hoax or something else entirely. And that something else was what Laura couldn't get out of her mind. Across town, Lucas sat on the porch of his home, blanket around his shoulders, a warm cup of cocoa in his hands. His mother sat beside him, one arm around his back. He hadn't spoken much since he came home, only short bursts about the dogs and how they knew the way. But today, something was different. He finally looked up at Sarah and said, "They were waiting for me." She gently asked, "Who was?" Lucas didn't hesitate. "The dogs." "What do you mean, sweetheart? You didn't even know they were there." Lucas stared into the distance. "They weren't lost. I was." That sentence, it struck something deep in Sarah's chest, because she realized her son wasn't just describing a rescue. He was describing a purpose. Back at the station, Laura visited the archives again, this time looking for something that had haunted her. A report filed 3 years ago by one of the injured handlers, Sergeant Dean Walker. Before he retired, Dean had scribbled something in his exit interview that was dismissed at the time. It had been labeled as the ramblings of a man recovering from trauma. But now, Laura wanted to read it again. She opened the old file. "They're not gone. Not really. I saw Rex that night in the trees. After the fire, I was half conscious, bleeding, but I swear to God, he looked right at me. He didn't run. He nodded, like he was staying behind for a reason." Laura sat back in her chair, chills running down her spine. Rex didn't die in that fire. None of them did. Something had pulled them deeper into the forest. Something stronger than duty. Meanwhile, whispers began to spread through the town. Someone had seen the dogs again, moving through backyards at night, silent as shadows. Someone else said they'd heard growling near the edge of the woods, only to find nothing but paw prints, 5 side by side. And then there was the woman who claimed one had stood guard outside her cabin during a thunderstorm, keeping coyotes at bay. When she opened the door to thank it, it was gone. Every story came with the same details. German shepherds, silent, coordinated, wearing old K9 vests, and always in groups of 5. Laura finally decided to speak with someone who might understand more. Sergeant Dean Walker himself. He lived in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, retired and reclusive. When Laura knocked, it took a while before the door creaked open. Dean looked older than she remembered, weathered, but his eyes still had that sharpness, the kind of look from a man who had seen things others wouldn't believe. "You came about the dogs," he said flatly. Laura nodded. "I think they're alive." Dean didn't blink. He opened the door wider and stepped aside. "I know they are." Inside, his living room was filled with photographs, some official, some personal. Most of them featured the 5 dogs: Rex, Shadow, Blitz, Kuno, and Jax. But one framed picture stood apart from the rest. It was taken after the fire, from a trail camera, Dean explained. It showed 5 shadows moving in the night, barely visible, but distinct. The timestamp was weeks after the forest had cooled. The dogs had survived. They stayed, Dean said, not because they were lost, because they had work left to do. He walked over to a wooden box and opened it slowly. Inside was Rex's original badge tag. Laura stared at it. But if this is here, how is Rex still wearing one? Dean looked her in the eyes. "I gave him a spare. The night he vanished. It was like he knew." The next morning, Laura couldn't shake the feeling that this case was bigger than just one lost boy and a few missing dogs. There was something deeper buried beneath the surface, something tied to the forest and the town's past. She pulled up old reports about disappearances and strange sightings near the fire zone. Over the past 5 years, several hikers and local residents had vanished without a trace. Most were young, adventurous types who loved exploring the woods. Search parties had combed the area but never found any clues. No footprints, no campsites, no signs of struggle. Some locals whispered about a curse. Others blamed wild animals or dangerous terrain. But Laura thought otherwise. One name kept appearing in the files, a forest ranger named Marcus Hayes. Marcus was known for his deep connection with the land and the animals that lived there. The last person to see some of the missing hikers, he'd reported unusual behavior from wildlife, especially the K9 units, before he mysteriously quit the force 2 years ago. When Laura tracked Marcus down at a small cabin near the forest's edge, he was reluctant to talk. "I don't want to stir up old ghosts," Marcus said quietly. But after a long pause, he added, "The dogs, they protect something no one understands." He explained that after the fire, the surviving K9S had been seen guarding a hidden part of the forest, an area no human had been able to access for decades. "There's an old mine there," Marcus said. "Abandoned, dangerous, but the dogs never left that area." Laura pressed him for more, but Marcus shook his head. "They're guarding something, maybe something that's connected to why those hikers disappeared." Back in town, Sarah watched Lucas carefully. His small hands trembled whenever he talked about the dogs, but his eyes held something strong, something ancient. One afternoon, Lucas asked to visit the forest edge again. Sarah hesitated but agreed. As they walked, the trees seemed to whisper. The ground was soft beneath their feet, but there was a tension in the air, like the forest was holding its breath. Lucas stopped suddenly, pointing toward a dark hollow hidden by thick bushes. "The dogs go there," he said. Sarah noticed faint paw prints leading inside. With a mix of fear and curiosity, they stepped in. The hollow was a narrow tunnel, carved by years of water and earth. It was cool and smelled of damp soil and old roots. Lucas crawled ahead, and Sarah followed close behind. At the end of the tunnel, they found something unexpected, a small clearing with an old wooden crate. Lucas reached inside and pulled out a tattered notebook. Sarah opened it carefully. The pages were filled with strange symbols and drawings, maps, coordinates, and notes about protectors and the bond. She glanced at Lucas. "What is this?" she asked. Lucas whispered, "It's their story." Meanwhile, Laura kept digging. She uncovered a connection between the 5 K9 dogs and an old military experiment that took place in the area during the 1970s. The government had tested enhanced K9 units designed for search and rescue, tracking, and protection during emergencies. Most dogs were retired or reassigned, but 5 were part of a special program that never officially ended. Could Rex and his team be descendants of that program? If so, what mission were they still carrying out? Laura realized she was standing on the edge of a secret that could rewrite everything the town thought it knew about its past. That night, as Lucas slept, Sarah sat by his bedside, notebook in hand. She read aloud passages about trust, loyalty, and an unbreakable bond between dogs and humans, one that transcended fear, pain, and even time. As the moonlight filtered through the window, Sarah felt the weight of the mystery pressing down on her. This wasn't just about a lost boy and heroic dogs anymore. It was about a promise made long ago, a promise that was about to be fulfilled. The following days were filled with tension and growing curiosity. Lucas seemed different, more confident, yet guarded. He kept asking about the dogs and their secret mission, but whenever Sarah or Laura tried to get more details, he'd clench his jaw and look away. One afternoon, Laura sat down with Lucas in the quiet corner of the local library. She opened the tattered notebook again, hoping it would help. "Lucas," she said gently, "can you tell me what this all means? What story are the dogs protecting?" Lucas looked around, making sure no one was listening. Then, in a low voice, he said something no one expected. "They're protecting the heart of the forest, the secret no one should find." Laura's heart raced. She leaned in closer. "Why? What's in the forest?" Lucas swallowed hard. "Long ago, before anyone lived here, there was a place of power. The animals knew about it. The dogs were chosen to guard it from danger." Sarah, who had joined them quietly, frowned. "But what kind of danger?" she asked. Lucas's eyes filled with tears. People who wanted to take it away. People who didn't understand. He told them about the day he got lost, about how he'd been running away from someone, and how the dogs had found him just in time. "They saved me," he whispered. Laura glanced at Sarah. "Who were you running from, Lucas?" He hesitated, then said, "My dad. He's been different since the fire. Angry, afraid. He wanted to find the forest secret and use it. I couldn't let that happen." The room fell silent. This wasn't just a lost child or protective dogs anymore. It was a family torn apart by fear and secrets. The town's whispers grew louder. People speculated about Lucas's father and his strange behavior. Some said he was obsessed with the forest's mysteries. Others feared he might be dangerous. Meanwhile, Laura and Sarah decided to return to the forest with Lucas and the dogs. This time, the dogs led the way confidently. Their movements were precise, purposeful. They navigated through thick underbrush, over fallen logs, and past hidden streams. At the center of the forest, they found something astonishing, an ancient stone circle, partially hidden by moss and vines. The stones pulsed faintly in the fading sunlight, like they held a secret energy. Lucas stepped forward, placing a hand on one of the stones. "It's the heart," he said softly. The dogs gathered around him, sitting calmly. Laura felt a strange warmth in the air, as if the forest was alive and watching. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the trees. "You shouldn't be here." It was Lucas's father. He emerged from the shadows, eyes wild with desperation. "I have to unlock its power," he said. "It's the only way to save us all." The confrontation was intense. Lucas stood between his father and the stone circle, the dogs flanking him protectively. "You don't understand," Lucas said, voice steady despite the fear. "This isn't about power. It's about balance." The dogs growled softly, warning. Lucas's father hesitated, then sank to his knees, overwhelmed. The tension broke, replaced by tears and regret. Laura stepped forward. "This forest, these dogs, they're protecting something sacred, not just to this town, but to the world." Lucas nodded. "The dogs saved me that day because they knew I had to protect the secret." As the sun set, the group made a silent promise to guard the forest's heart together, humans and dogs united. The mystery was no longer just a story. It was a shared mission. Lucas, the dogs, and the town had become part of something much bigger than themselves. After that intense day at the stone circle, life in the town slowly started to change. The secret of the forest wasn't just a local legend anymore. It was real, alive, and intertwined with the very soul of the community. Lucas became braver. The fear in his eyes began to fade, replaced by a quiet strength. The dogs were always nearby, their watchful eyes a constant comfort. The town, too, felt different. People started to respect the forest more, understanding it was not just a backdrop to their lives, but a living, breathing guardian of something precious. Laura and Sarah worked together to teach others about the forest's importance. They organized small groups to care for the woods, clean up trails, and protect the animals living there. The dogs often joined these efforts, their presence a reminder of loyalty and protection. But not everyone was convinced. Some people remained skeptical, whispering about superstition and old stories that should be forgotten. There were those who wanted to exploit the forest for profit or land, ignoring the warnings that had saved Lucas. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, Laura received a call from Lucas. "Come quick," he said, voice urgent. When Laura arrived, Lucas was standing near the edge of the forest. The dogs gathered around him, alert and tense. "What's wrong?" Laura asked. Lucas pointed to the trees. "There's something coming." From the shadows, figures emerged, strangers with unfamiliar faces and cold eyes. They carried tools, ready to cut and dig. The dogs growled low, their bodies tense. Laura stepped forward, heart pounding. "This forest is protected," she said firmly. "You need to leave." The strangers sneered. "We're here to take what we want," one said. "Nothing's stopping us." At that moment, the dogs moved as one, blocking the path, standing firm between the strangers and the forest. They barked loudly, a sound that echoed through the trees, powerful and commanding. The strangers hesitated, eyes wide, unsure of what to do. Lucas stood tall beside the dogs. "This forest is alive," he said quietly, "and it will fight back if you try to hurt it." The leader of the group glanced nervously at the dogs, then at Lucas. Without another word, they turned and left. After the strangers disappeared, Laura knelt beside Lucas. "You were amazing," she said softly. Lucas smiled, looking at the dogs. "They're not just dogs," he said. "They're guardians." The bond between Lucas and the dogs had grown deeper. Together, they protected the forest's heart, standing strong against any threat. As days passed, the town began to come together like never before. The story of the dogs and the forest spread, inspiring people to act with kindness and courage. The dogs became local heroes, symbols of loyalty and bravery. And Lucas, he found a new purpose: to protect the secret, to honor the dogs who saved him, and to ensure the forest remained safe for generations to come. This was no ordinary story about a child and some dogs. It was a powerful reminder of what can happen when trust, courage, and love come together. The forest's heart beat strong, guarded by those who understood its true meaning. Life settled into a new rhythm, but the story of Lucas and the K9 German Shepherds was far from over. One chilly morning, a call came to the local police station about a lost child near the forest's edge. Lucas's face immediately flashed in Laura's mind. She rushed to the scene, accompanied by the handlers of the German Shepherds. When they arrived, they found Lucas standing calmly among the trees. But this time, something was different. He wasn't alone. Behind him stood a figure, a tall, quiet man who had been missing from the town for weeks. The man's name was Marcus. He was known for his reclusive nature, but had a reputation for kindness toward animals. Marcus explained that he had been living deep in the forest, tending to an injured animal he couldn't abandon. The dogs, it turned out, had been drawn not just to Lucas, but to Marcus's acts of compassion. Their protective circle was bigger than anyone had realized. Laura felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The dog's instincts were sharper than anyone could guess. Over the next few weeks, the town witnessed something incredible. The K9 unit and Marcus began working together, helping injured wildlife and maintaining the forest. Lucas, now more confident than ever, was right by their side. The dogs were no longer just guardians. They were healers, companions, and heroes. But peace was fragile. A fierce storm swept through the region, causing damage to homes and the forest. Trees fell, paths disappeared, and animals were displaced. The dogs sprang into action. They guided rescue teams, comforted frightened residents, and helped locate those trapped by the floodwaters. Their training, loyalty, and courage saved lives that day. Lucas watched, eyes wide, realizing the true depth of the bond between humans and dogs. One evening, as the storm cleared, Lucas sat quietly with the dogs under a starry sky. He whispered, "Thank you." The dogs looked at him with soft eyes, as if they understood every word. The town's respect and love for the K9 German Shepherds grew stronger. They were more than just police dogs. They were family. And the story of the day they surrounded a crying child on the road became a symbol of hope, protection, and the unbreakable bond between humans and their four-legged friends. Everything changed on that quiet afternoon. Right when nobody expected it. Lucas had been silent for a long time, but now, surrounded by the protective wall of those K9 German Shepherds, he finally spoke, his voice trembling but clear. "I was scared," he said softly. eyes searching the faces of the people watching. I got lost, and I didn't know how to get home. But then, he whispered something no one expected. There was someone following me, someone who wanted to hurt me. A cold shiver ran through the crowd. People looked around, fear and disbelief mixing in the air. The police immediately sprang into action, scanning the road and nearby woods. And the dogs, they didn't just sit quietly. They stood, alert and ready. One of the handlers stepped forward, kneeling beside Lucas. "Do you remember what they looked like?" the handler asked gently. Lucas nodded, his small hands gripping the handler's jacket. It was a man tall, wearing a dark jacket. "I think he wanted to take me somewhere." That's when the dog's instincts kicked into high gear. They began to move together, quiet, coordinated, and intense. They sniffed the air, their noses leading them down the road and into the forest. The entire neighborhood held its breath. The dogs were following a trail that could lead to Lucas's pursuer. And then, after what felt like an eternity, they stopped near an old abandoned cabin deep in the woods. The cabin was dark, weather-beaten, and covered with vines. Inside, hidden in the shadows, was the man Lucas had described. He looked startled as the dogs approached, but didn't try to run. Instead, he collapsed to the floor, caught by the sheer presence and calm power of the K9 team. That moment was powerful beyond words. Thanks to the bravery of those German shepherds, Lucas was safe. The man was taken into custody, and the town finally understood how incredible those dogs really were. They weren't just animals. They were protectors, heroes with a purpose bigger than anyone could have imagined. And Lucas, he was finally home. That's the moment when everything changed. Not just for Lucas, but for everyone who witnessed the loyalty, intelligence, and heart of those K9 German shepherds. Because sometimes, the most unlikely heroes come on four paws. That day changed everything for Lucas, the town, and the incredible K9 German shepherds who surrounded him on that lonely road. What started as a scary moment, just a little boy alone and scared, turned into a story about courage, trust, and the deep bond between humans and dogs. Those dogs didn't just protect Lucas because they were trained to. They did it because they understood something powerful: how to care, how to watch over someone who couldn't protect themselves. The community saw firsthand what true loyalty looks like. The way those dogs formed shield around Lucas showed that sometimes the best guardians don't wear badges. They have fur and wagging tails. Lucas's bravery, the dog's instincts, and the kindness of strangers who didn't turn away made sure this story had a happy ending. And it reminds us all, no matter how tough things get, we're never really alone when we have friends who truly care. Sometimes, those friends come with paws and a nose for danger. If you love this story, don't forget to subscribe for more amazing animal moments.